Listen, there are times when life is just so good. You know what I'm saying? Life is full. Think back on your life just for a little while. Think back to some of the very best moments you've ever had in your life. In fact, if you want to grab your tile and write it down on there, you could draw an epic picture. Maybe this one time you saw a farting buffalo. I don't know. Whatever it is that comes to mind, I want you to think about it. At least call it to mind. Think about those times when life was just good. Life was full. Everything was the way that you hoped it would be. When I think back to my high school times, I think about the day that I got my driver's license, which was actually the second time I took the test because I blew a stop sign. My bad, failed. They don't give you a license, it's probably good. But it was awesome. First time rolling out in freedom, so good. I remember both times sprinting onto the field for the state championship for our class and in football and in Illinois. It was awesome, just running out, running into the guy next to me. We've been fighting the whole season through, been battling together, and we finally got where we wanted to go. We got to play on the turf, got to play on TV. It was so good. At that moment, I was like, man, I don't know if life could get a lot better than this. I remember graduation when I got to give this speech to the whole class, the whole school. It was awesome. I got to speak on behalf of Jesus because he was my savior at the time and talk about he was really the way that we succeed in life. It was so good. How about you? What are the moments for you that life has just been good? I could keep going. I could talk about the day she said yes 18 years ago. So good. So good. I totally tricked her. I feel a little bad, but she's awesome. She's amazing. God's been so good. I could think of every single day. I can remember the moment. I can remember the room. I can remember the place when I first got to hold my son, and then my daughter, and then my son, and then my son. Just life could not get better. I could think about the time my third child was born, and after a long season of just brutal depression for my wife, like debilitating depression, God did this miracle in a moment, and she said a thing that I'd been praying, and there's no way she could have known. The very words I've been praying came out of her mouth, and in that moment, I was just full, and life was good. Have you had those moments where life was just so full? Life was so good. Peter had some moments like this. In fact, he kind of goes off on a tirade at the beginning of his letter that he would write 30 years after the story as we pick it up here in just a few minutes. But 30 years later, he would write something like this in 1 Peter chapter 1. He says this, what a God we have. What a God we have, and how fortunate we are to have him, the Father of our Maker, of our Master Jesus. Because Jesus was raised from the dead, we've been given a brand new life. And we have everything to live for. And as some of you dropped some rocks last night, you're stepping into that for the first time, and I'm so stoked for you. It says, including a future in heaven, and the future starts now. God is keeping careful watch over us and the future. The day is coming when you will have it all. Life, healed and whole. A brand new life and everything to live for. There are moments when life is just like that. And then there's moments that it's not. Peter was in a moment just like this. The opposite of whatever that moment we just described is, that's this moment that he's in right now, that these guys so aptly describe on the screen, that we pick it up at the end of chapter 26 in Matthew, where Peter is weeping bitterly. And can you blame him? I mean, the very moment that this bold speaker, this one who had proclaimed that Jesus was the Christ, the very moment when he said, no, I will never, ever, there's no way, I'll never deny him. But as he curses himself, if he ever knew Jesus, at that very moment, the sound he hears is a rooster crow, and he looks across, and through an opening in some passageway somewhere meets eyes with Jesus, and his stomach sinks. And the only option is to weep bitterly. Can you imagine what that felt like? A failure of epic proportion with the one person he never wanted to fail with. What am I saying? You know what that feels like, don't you? I've been doing student ministry a long time. I bet each one of you have sat down and had those kind of conversations with the amazing leaders that are here. Maybe you haven't yet, but you know exactly what it feels like. For the very thing you thought you could live up to, the expectation you had painted of yourself, the hope that you have, the dream that you had, epically fails. And you're left holding that failure. We're going to go on a little bit of a journey tonight. And I hope that you're brave enough to stay with it. I hope you don't duck it because you're uncomfortable. The road we're going to take today is a road that I've seen every single person who could speak the way we just read about Peter speaking. Every single person I know who can speak with that utter confidence about how good it is to walk with God has walked this road, and there's no shortcut. There's no way around, and so I need you to be brave. If you want to go there, if you want to see the beauty of what God has for you, then you've got to face the ugliness of failure. And so if you're brave enough, I want to encourage you to just set your hands out in front of you, just as you did earlier. And I want you to call to mind some of your failure. Call to mind some of your failure. Now, you can be ridiculous with this just a little bit if you want. I could call to mind, if I was in high school, I could call to mind both of those state championships where I walked off the field having lost both of them by 2 points, gone all the way and just not able to finish at the end. I could talk about my sophomore year of basketball. I could talk about how I can remember the place, I can smell the gym, I can know where every player is and what number they're wearing. The moment in front of the entire team, the coach looks at me and says, Moore, you've got a hell of a defense, but when it comes to offense, you don't have a clue. I know how that feels. Maybe those are the kind of moments you call to mind. Maybe it's a little more ridiculous, like the time where in my freshman year of college, I wanted to prove to the whole college how athletic I was, so I went and played basketball. And I didn't realize that it was the team tryout. And so I'm trying to run down the court, and here's my moment. The only thing I had going for me was I was a little bit fast. And so I pick off a pass at the top of the key, and I'm running alone to the other end. Now look at me. You know I'm not going to dunk, but it was going to be a sweet finish. And so I plant my left foot to go up for a layup. My knee buckles. The ball goes up, hits the bottom of the net. It's at that moment I realize the entire college is in the gymnasium at that moment, laughing their heads off as that sound of skin against floor going until the wall stopped me. It can be like that. But maybe there's failures that matter more to you than those kind of things. You can be brave on that level. You can call to mind that kind of stuff, or you can go farther. How brave do you want to be? How far are you going to let Jesus in tonight? Would you be willing to entertain the deepest things that haunt you in your failures so that Jesus might actually bring healing? You know, there are failures kind of like Peter where maybe you overestimated your ability and you were so confident, you were so there, but you came up short. Just place it in your hands. Just put it there. Just imagine it in your hands. Maybe it's you did the that's the worst. I'm so sorry. Did the very thing you said you would never, ever do. The thing you could never imagine would be something that you would be the kind of person who would do. You did that. I want you to call it to mind and just place it in your hand. I know it's getting tough, but you got to walk the road. Maybe it's that you didn't do. You failed to do the thing you had always said that you would do. All of these could be Peter. Or maybe like Peter, you let down one of the people who meant the most to you in this whole world. And the disappointment just rests there. And you try not to think about it. And you try to escape it. But would you be bold enough and brave enough to just set that in your lap, just set it in your hands for just a little bit? Because here's the thing. Whether it's a recurring addiction, whether it's a moment in your past, whether it's a broken relationship, whatever it is that you're bold enough and brave enough to call to mind, where you take that will change everything. What you do with what's right here, right now, will change everything about this journey that you might even think you want to be on. You see, there was this guy, and this guy, he saw Jesus from a distance. He started to follow Jesus. You know, just like a lot of you just took this bold challenge a couple nights ago, say, yeah, let's do this. Even just 5 days, I'll go with you. And he saw enough of Jesus, said, this guy is awesome. I'll give him a chance. He starts walking around with him. He was everywhere with him. He was there when he walked out across the water. He was there when he calmed the seas. He was there when he triumphantly marched into Jerusalem. He was just like Peter. His name was Judas. You see, we've been talking about Peter, and I'm so excited for you to hear the whole story for the next couple of days, but there's these two guys, and which one you resonate with has everything to do with what you do with what's in your hands, and what the rest of your journey, what your and then is going to look like. See, Peter wasn't the only one with an epic failure, was he? Maybe you're not familiar with the story of Judas, but Judas was the one who sold Jesus out. He was there at the Last Supper. He had followed everywhere. He'd seen all the same things. He'd been a part of almost everything except the things that Jesus had taken just 3 to. He had been a part of the journey. He said yes. He went out with pairs and said, this is who Jesus is, and came back full of joy and celebrated with Jesus for 1.5 to 3 years. He's a guy. He's one of the guys who hung out with Jesus, said, yes, I'm in. I'll follow. Let's do this, until the moment that he failed. And the terrifying thing about Judas is that he had no idea what to do with his failure. And one of my fears for every single one of us is that we wouldn't know where to take our failure. Check this out in Matthew. Levi records this story. In Matthew chapter 27, it says this: when Judas, who had betrayed Jesus, realized that Jesus had been condemned to die, he was filled with remorse. When you think about this, you know just what that feels like, right? That regret that sets in is wrecking him. And so what did he do? Here's what he does. He says, so he took the 30 pieces of silver back to the leading priests and the elders. And he says, I've sinned, he declared, for I betrayed an innocent man. And look how they respond. What do we care? They retorted. That's your problem. Do not buy that lie. Judas bought this lie that it was his problem. You see, he'd been left holding the bag. What seemed so right, what felt so good, with the thing he thought maybe he would never do, he sells out Jesus, and then he realizes he's desperately wrong, and he's stuck holding this failure, and he's not sure where to take it. He goes back to the very place, and he tries to undo it. But let me just tell you, as a youth pastor, I've sat in so many rooms. I've sat so many times across from students just like you, who just wish they could undo it, who could take that failure and just whatever it is. And I'm so sad because I sit there and they hold that failure out in front of them and they describe the devastation that they've caused from their choices or their failure, or the junk going on around them in their world. And I want to be able to say they can undo it, but you can't unlie. Lies kill relationship. You can't ungossip, and gossip kills community, because that's what sin does. That's what failure does. It kills stuff. That's what the scripture says. The wages of sin is death. It's just what sin does. It kills stuff. And you have to live with that. You just sit with that. What do you do with that? Sit across from that student. I just wish I could tell him, yeah, you can unsleep with them. I wish I could look him in the eye and say, yeah, you can undisappoint your parents. You can unshipwreck your faith. I wish I could tell that girl, you can unabort that baby. It's awful, isn't it? Even as you think about whatever it is in front of you, and it doesn't matter how it compares to anybody else, it's the one sitting in your hands. And the question is, what do we do with this? I wish I could tell Ryan what he could do with it. Ryan with this was one of those kids that I sat across from, and then in the end, I didn't have a chance to sit across from him. Ryan was one of those guys. He was so impulsive. He was one of the funniest guys ever. In fact, it was at this campus that our students invented this game called Wombies. It's like a cross between werewolves and zombies. And one person starts with it, and they chase people around in dark dorms that nobody's staying in, and then you bite somebody, and now they have it, right? Because our boys are weird and creepy like that. It's just how it works. And so they would be just, all I know is I walked up to the third floor of one of these dorms over here, and this guy just going like, and then biting each other. I'm like, I don't really know what's going on. But they loved it so much that they invited all kinds of boys from all over our town to play at our church. My bad, we broke like $15,000 worth of stuff. That's not the moral of the story. The moral of the story is that tons of guys show up because they invited their friends, and one of those guys' names was Ryan. And Ryan showed up. And what God had already given some context in his life for, he found the meaning of. We started to share with him the gospel. He started to show up at our student gathering and realize, man, Jesus is the deal. Because see, he was this kid who was born in Russia, and at 2 years old, this random family in some farm town in the middle of Illinois says, we'll take him. He doesn't have anywhere to go, we'll take him. And that was his story, and he had lived it, and all of a sudden he realized this was this amazing picture that God had put in his life of adoption, and he became part of God's family. And like many of you, he said, you know what, Jesus, I'm in. Let's do this. And Ryan was all in on whatever he was doing. He was so impulsive. He was so crazy. He wanted to play Wombies like every single night because he was pretty sure that if we played that, like hundreds more people would start following Jesus because of this game. You just couldn't control this kid. In fact, one time he sat across from a leader and he just said this. He was so intense about this. He was kind of crazy at times, but he would just sit down and he said, you know what? When I grow up, I want to be Robin Hood. But I'm going to like rob banks and give it to missions. Like... Love where your heart's at, bro. Let's talk about the execution. You know what I mean? He was just going, and he was going full tilt. But a guy like that makes mistakes, you know? And you start to gather up failures. And over time, he just wasn't sure what to do with those. In fact, he had gathered up enough at his school, and he had done something bad enough that he wasn't sure if the answer was going to be suspension or expulsion. He didn't want to disappoint Jesus. And he didn't want to disappoint me. He didn't want to disappoint his parents. Didn't want to disappoint his coach. He had no idea what to do with this. He bought the same lie that Judas bought. You know what it was? Did you hear it? That's your problem. Because you see, that's exactly what Satan would try to convince every single one of us, that this failure that you're holding is yours alone. And that there's no one who will come alongside you. In fact, if he can convince you that you're the only one who's ever looked at porn, if you're the only one who's ever slept around, if you're the only one who's ever lied to if you're the only one who might be addicted to that or to this, if he could just convince you that's your problem, and you just hold it, you just sit with it. You just live with it. He's got you. And you start to buy this lie. You want to believe that it doesn't matter. And you try to escape it with all kinds of entertainment and relationships, maybe at some point some kind of drugs or something to get away from everything else, to try to escape the fact that you got to hold this. And the longer he can get you to hold it, the better chance is that you'll do what Ryan did. I remember getting on the plane flying back from Vegas. It was 5 months after I moved. Bought a red eye on the worst airline I've ever been on. It's like the school bus of the sky. It was awful. To sit with the boys that he had followed Jesus with. He took a phone and broke it on accident. But it was the straw that was just too much. And he bought the lie that he was all alone in it, and that this was his problem. He had no idea what he could do with his failure. And his end was a little bit like Judas's, because when you don't know what else to do, You do what you can. In Matthew 27, verse 5, then Judas threw the silver coins down in the temple, and he went out and hanged himself. I don't know what you do with your failure. Some of you have no idea what to do with it. You try to escape it, you try to get away with it, but you're just stuck holding it, and you've bought the lie that it's yours and yours alone. And I've been in youth ministry long enough to know that some of you have thought about taking your life. There's a lot of you who haven't. There's a lot of you who you're pretty strong. You're pretty busy. You find ways to navigate this, but let me just tell you, over time it's going to pile up. And you're living a half-life until you know what to do with this, until you know what's possible to do with this. You cannot live until you face the ugliness of this, the brutal, the heaviness of this, and until you found out where to put this. You can never live the life that Jesus has called you into. I wish Judas would have lasted long enough to see. I'm so glad that Peter did. I wish Ryan could have believed. 3 simple words that Jesus said, if he had believed those to his toes, if he could have just walked that into the things he was holding, if you could just walk 3 words into what you're holding, you would know just what to do with this. And you could set it down. Not like it didn't happen. That's denial. Not like it didn't matter, that's minimizing, that's not it. Not like it wasn't real, that's a lie, but the full weight of it, that there was somewhere to place it where it would have no more power, where it would have no more weight, where it would have no more strength. I wish I could just tell Ryan, and I'm here to tell you, it doesn't have to be this way. That in Jesus, everything can change. That in Jesus, you are not stuck holding this. You need to feel the weight of it. And I've made you miserable for long enough. You need to feel the weight of it. Because until you feel the weight and the ugliness of your sin, you could never appreciate the beauty of what Jesus did on the cross. Jesus came for people like you, people like me, people who fail. And he says, you know what? Here's what I want you to do with all of this. I want you to bring that, and I want you to set it down right at my feet. You're like, what the heck does that mean? This is the beauty of the cross. I love this so much. There's this amazing picture in what Jesus did. You think the gospel may or may not matter, but the truth is it matters every single second. Maybe not any more than in the place where you have failed. The very thing that you've been holding, you get to set that down. Jesus said, you know what? Don't just bring me your failure. Bring this to me and bring with it all the pain. Take a second and just call to mind the pain that has been caused in that failure. Jesus said, bring it. I'll take it. You can set that right here. That's for me. If you're not sure about that, you're like, listen, you don't know what I did. Like, it's a lot of pain. It deserves some pain. Like, I should probably be, like, in legit trouble for the things that I've done. There's, like, major issues that I've caused for me and people around me. Jesus got that. I don't know if you've seen the picture of what happened to Jesus. The gospel authors minimize it quite a bit. But this whole scourging thing that Jesus went through was no small deal. All the pain of every single one of our sin, every single one of our failures, he took on his back when they stretched him around a log or over a bench, and then took a little handle with like 9, maybe 9, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, straps coming out of it full of bone, tied in, glass tied in, rocks tied in. And a lot of people say, you know what, it's 40 minus 1 lashes, but at that point, who really cares? As that was thrown across his back by Roman centurions in entertainment, not by one, because he would have worn out and that would have lost the effect, but passing it from person to person. One guy steps across, takes a breath, takes a drink, comes back for another round, another lash across his back as he rips the skin across, exposing his ribs, exposing his vertebrae, ripping around to the front, maybe over to his face. He's no stranger to pain. He says, all that pain of your failure, I've paid it. I took it. I mean, even past the scourging, once they threw his clothes back on him, take him back into trial, bring him back, rip him off, put a cape on his back from one of the Roman soldiers as they mock him as a king, ram the thorns, the crown of thorns over the top of his head. I mean, all of this before they throw like a 75-plus pound beam across his shredded raw meat back and walks him out of town to the point where he can't even carry it. Somebody else has to take it. Throw him down on the ground. Nails his feet. I don't know how familiar you are with this. I don't know if they nailed his feet sideways or if they nailed him on each side of the cross. Little bend in the knee. Through the wrists probably to support his weight. So that every single time he'd have to take a breath, he'd have to press up of that nail long enough to catch a breath, and then in exhaustion collapse back down, being caught by nails. 6 hours. It's a long time. He took all the pain of our failure. All the pain that this has been causing you. Jesus is saying, stop holding that. Bring it to me. I've taken that pain. All the shame, man. Listen, failure is just full of shame, right? We're just so afraid that people are going to see. They're going to mock us. Jesus took all of that. You don't have to hold this. Jesus says, bring all your failure and set it at my feet. He took mockery from Roman soldiers who bowed down to him. The crown of thorns was all about mockery. The cape on his back was all about mockery. They strung him up naked as if it wasn't embarrassing enough. He took all of that. That shame that Satan tries to throw at you, that others try to throw at you. Jesus took all of that. He says, listen, all of the shame and all of the pain that comes with this, just bring it to me. All the guilt. Because here's the truth. This is the worst part of what we're holding. Is that we did it. We're not even innocent. But Jesus was. And he says, all that guilt, I'll take it. See, Judas missed all of this. And I don't want you to miss it. That you can take all of that and set that at the feet of Jesus. And you know what he's going to say over all of that? We're afraid of what he's going to say is, that's your problem, but that's not what Jesus says. Jesus says 3 words, and we find them in John chapter 19. After 6 hours, after the scourging, after the nails, after the crown, after the mockery, after people just walking by who don't even know what's going on, spitting at him and saying, hey, you said you're going to save the world, why don't you come on down? After 6 hours, in John 19:30, he says this amazing thing that if you would take this to the center of who you are, it would change everything that you have right here. In verse 30, it says, when Jesus had tasted it, he said this, it is finished. You see, what Satan will try to do with all of this right here is he'll try to say, that's your problem. And you know what? That's your problem alone. And he's going to accuse you, you did it. You're the one who screwed this up. You're the failure. You are a failure. You always failed. This is what you do. You mess it up. You say you're going to be this, but this is always what happens. You say you're not going to get online again, and you're right back there. You say you're not going to do this. You say you're not going to gossip. You say you're not going to trash those girls. You say you're not going to do that with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, and then you're right back here every time. You are a failure. You are finished. And Judas believed it, and he said, I am finished. But what Jesus says is this. He says, no. With all of that in your hand, you're not finished. It's finished. He says, it is finished. All of the guilt that would ever separate us from God, all of the shame that we would ever need to feel, any inclination that we would ever have anything to earn back from God or any payment that we would need to make, Jesus says, done. It's finished. And so you have this amazing opportunity. You get to choose your and then. You can sit and live with this right here, and you can hold it for as long as you want. But I love earlier that we prayed with open hands and said, God, I'm listening. Are you listening? Because if you aren't, what you'll do is you'll hold it, and you'll regret it, and you'll try to escape it, you'll try to minimize it, you'll try to do anything you can to get away from it, but it will follow you. And you can believe the lie. And if someone tells you long enough that you're finished, you eventually start to believe, I'm finished. And you can go that route if you want. Or you could trust Jesus when after 6 hours, he says, all of it is finished. What would it take for you to move from I am finished to it is finished? What would it take for you, instead of following the path of Judas, and whether it's suicide or whether it's just a long, slow death over the course of life, living separate from Jesus, to move from that to following Jesus and saying, you know what, I'm not finished. It's finished. I love this. It's the beauty of what Paul said in Romans chapter 8, verse 3. He says this. He says, God declared an end to sin's control over us by giving his son as a sacrifice for our sins. Hold your hands out. You ready? I want you to take everything that you have in those hands. Every failure, every sin, every disappointment, every single time that you have come up short. And I want you to ask yourself, what do I want to do with this? Do I want to believe the lie that this is mine alone to hold and that I am finished? Or do I want to be just crazy enough to trust Jesus when he says, it is finished? Do you want to be just crazy enough to go to your leader or to a trusted friend or to a group and say, this is what I've got, and look your Christian brother in the eye or your Christian sister in the eye and have them tell you, listen, I know it hurts and I know there's shame, but it is finished. When you're holding that addiction and that thing that you've been struggling with for years, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to believe the lie that you really can't overcome this? Is the fact that you have failed before mean that you always have to fail? That's not true. That when we trust Jesus, he fills us with his spirit, that we can go to war against anything that is robbing us of life. The truth is that Jesus killed everything that is killing you. The question is, will you believe him when he says, it's finished? The next time you're going to walk toward that computer, it's finished. The next time you're going to sneak out, disobey, lie, mislead your parents, instead look it in the eye and say, it is finished. Every single time Satan or anybody else tries to accuse you that you're a failure, you'll never make it, you'll never overcome that, for you to stare him in the face and say, it is finished. And that one word, full payment, nothing else is needed. It's not like Jesus' sacrifice plus a little bit of your suffering. It's not Jesus' sacrifice plus a little bit of your penance or serving or doing something for God. It is finished. What would it take for you to believe that to the core of who you are? Because if you do, then this amazing thing can happen. You know what's in your hands? You can take that and you can set it down at Jesus' feet. And say, I believe you. Any power that had over me was paid for long ago. But there is nothing that can stand against us, Romans 8 says. That there is nothing that can condemn us. That there is nothing that can separate us, because we take all of this and we set it down. We say it's finished. And we step into a life that looks totally different. Imagine, just for a minute, imagine what it would look like if you lived as if it was finished. That you were actually forgiven. That no more payment was needed. Imagine that you could live as if it was finished. You could live free That every accusation, you have a response. It is finished. The freedom you could live with. Imagine how filled you would be if you could say everything that separated you from God was just set at his feet because he paid for it, because he loves you, and he's crazy about you, and he's been waiting for you. You could set it down. Imagine instead of carrying around all that junk, you set it down and you said, God, fill me with your Spirit, send me where you want. You see, there's a difference between Judas and Peter. You get the rest of Peter's story the rest of this week. I don't get to tell it to you, though. I wish I could. Peter stuck around just long enough, and I think it has everything to do with him hanging out with his friends. I think his friends said, hold on. I think they went back to fishing. They did this whole thing, and then all of a sudden, Jesus comes back and everything changes. And Jesus looks him in the eye and says, your failure, man, it's finished. Let's keep going. And he steps into a life filled with the Spirit, full of boldness and kingdom impact, but you only get that chance if you take all of this in its horror and ugliness, own the depths of it, and set it at Jesus' feet, and boldly say over it, not because of you, but because of Jesus, it is finished. So what do you want to do? You're going to hang on to it, or are you going to set it down? Would you be crazy enough to take Jesus at his word and say all the stuff that you've been holding down, you could just set it down? In fact, we're going to give you a way to do this tonight. Now, I got to give you some logistics, otherwise 1,800 people, this is going to be crazy talk, okay? So here's what's going to happen. Is if you legitimately want to take this and set this down, not if you want to be part of some cool element at a conference somewhere, not if you just don't want to be the last person sitting in your row by yourself. I mean legitimately, if you want in your heart of hearts to take all of your failure and say, Jesus, I don't want this anymore. You can have all the pain, you can have all the shame, you can have all the guilt, you can take all of it because you love me and you paid for it all. I want you to have all of it. If that's you, what I want to encourage you to do is no matter what seat you're in, I want you to head to the back of the center aisle and come right down the middle. So even if you're right here, go around and come back down the middle. If you're on the outside, come right to the center back aisle and come right down the front. And what you're going to find is some spray bottles, some that you can probably resonate with. Because we feel like this, that what we wish was that our life was this clean slate right here. Beautiful, pure, awesome, everything set to go, that we weren't carrying any of this stuff. But the truth is, every single one of you had a mountain of things to put in your hands when I started talking. But if you want to take all of those and set those in Jesus' hand, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take your hand, I want you to put it on one of these spray bottles. And I just want you to give it a spray and take all of the junk that's in your life and just release it onto that canvas. The mess, the ugly, the awful, whatever has messed up the awesomeness that God has for you, I want you to take it just one time. 1,800 of you, one spray, lots of dots, lots of failure, it's all there. Just take it and in one simple act, just say, Jesus, I hand all of this to you. And as you do that, maybe just make it even more real. Just with your hands, just drop everything that you carried up here. And with a bold voice, just say, it's finished. This no longer has any strength over me. This no longer has any power over me. I will not carry this. God never expected me to carry this alone. I'm not alone in this. I'm not the only one. Jesus paid for all of this. It is finished. And leave it here. And decide that the and then of your life is going to be a step into the forgiveness that Jesus already paid for. And the freedom that you could live in if you just weren't carrying that. And the filling, the room that would happen in your life for the Holy Spirit to move in when you drop it. And just say, I'm done. It's finished. If you're bold enough to face this, and you're just crazy enough to trust the creator of the universe, who loves you more than you could possibly imagine, when he says it's finished, I want you to get out of your chair here in a few minutes, and I want you to set it all down in one simple act. And then I want you to go to your groups later and refuse to let anyone pick it back up. To look them in the eye and say, it's finished. Let's step out of this. Let's live in forgiveness. Let's celebrate freedom. Let's be filled with the Spirit, and let's walk a totally different kind of life. It opens up so many possibilities for your end then. It's exactly what God has in mind for you. Christian, don't leave with this. It's finished.